the June 29th meeting of the Common Council to order at 7 o'clock. Mark Boyce, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely, thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Lees, will you call the roll?
Mr. Ayers.
Present.
Mr. Boyce.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Hampton.
Present.
Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Present.
Mr. Smith. Ms. Wiles.
Present.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of our June 15th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. This is a roll call vote this evening.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
The minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Or eight, excuse me, 8.
Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. This is also a roll call vote.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved.
Be on your toes tonight, Ms. Lees. The petitions by citizens who are present, there is a white card to fill out. If anybody has any comments this evening, you can drop them off with the clerk's office. I have none yet. However, does anyone want to speak this evening? Council committee reports. We will start with the Downtown District Committee.
Yes, the Downtown District Committee met on June 21st. Brian Ayers, Darren Peterson, Aaron Smith, and myself were present. We had an update from Noblesville Main Street and hearing about their upcoming plans, as well as the continuation of working with the downtown business owners on this business advocacy group as we continue with the downtown streetscape plan. We did a review of status of funds and where we have still funds available for projects yet this year. Of course, there was discussion about streetlights, so we're continuing on with installing some more, and there is an item on the agenda this evening that will be an appropriation from the Downtown District Fund to pay for streetlights. And actually, Patty Johnson was there and talked about how one of our quad lights was recently hit at the corner of 8th and Connor, so we're having to replace that one as well. We talked about the Brick Alley Rehabilitation Project, and we are working on putting together a proposal and design where we can still maintain some of the historic brick, but then put in areas of pavement and concrete so that the cars would travel on that versus on the brick, the historic brick, and tearing it up. So that is a project in the works, and we are working in conjunction with Noblesville Preservation Alliance to make sure that they are in agreement with our plans. So that's moving forward. We talked about the design west of White River and working in conjunction with the Bridge of Flowers project. That will be an ongoing activity. And then we talked through also alley activations and looking at some new designs or additional designs for the archway for the East Alley. And we were going to be receiving some additional designs, which we have now received. And so we'll be giving that feedback and hopefully moving forward with that. And that's really the gist of the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Wiles? Seeing none. Public safety.
Yes, thank you very much. Public Safety Committee met on June 22nd at 3:30. The council members that were present were myself, Brian Ayers, Greg O'Connor, and Pete Schwartz. The two main things we did during this meeting was we had Noblesville Youth Assistance and Cherish Center both come and present and talk about what they're using, the part of the budget that we're giving them to do for the betterment of our community. Tanya Wilhite came from Noblesville Youth Assistance and talked about how they're really rebuilding. One of the great things is our very own city attorney, Lindsay Bennett, is now on the board of directors there. So I think that will be a very good addition to them and also helping them rebuild, because they've got quite a bit of rebuilding to do, it sounds like, from everything. So, but they've got a lot of potential. I think that's a good organization. Then Wendy Gamble came from Chair Center and talked a lot about what they are doing. They are up to 6 people of staff now internally, so they are definitely growing. And I know they have one more that just started this week, so.
Any questions for Mr. Boyce? Seeing none, economic development.
Thank you, Mr. President. Economic Development Committee met June 25th. Mr. Davis, Mr. Smith, Ms. Wiles, and I were in attendance. Primary topics, Bob Dubois from the Chamber was there, presented an overview of what the utilization of the city's support for the Chamber has been utilized for, which includes a taste of business and a variety of other things. And I think primarily Bob's desire was to update us on how we can, how we are and can further work together with the Chamber on business retention and trying to find ways to make sure that our good business citizens are communicating with us and us with them, and hopefully being able to use the Chamber a little more actively to do that. We also heard from Blue Sky Commerce, and this is a project that you'll hear more about, but they made a presentation on business retention and attraction, and being more intentional about how we strategically go out in the market and talk to businesses that we're looking to attract. So this will take a capital investment on the council's part, but you'll get more detail on this as we move forward. I don't want to go into all the details here, but I think the committee was favorably impressed and would look to potentially recommend this, but we want to circulate the information. It'll likely be a part of the budgeting process, so in any event, wanted to give you the heads up on that. It was very well done. I think it makes a lot of sense for where we're trying to go in the future. So we also covered the tax abatement compliance, and I think there's an agenda item on here this evening on a couple of those abatements that we need to consider reinstatement of. And then we got into business development that's happening across the city. Laid out some of the activities. There have been quite a number of business visits, although second quarter was a little less than first quarter, but I think some of that's seasonal. Real estate development, workforce development, and operations were all topics that we covered as well, but suffice to say that the economic development people are very busy, and we'll see more fruits of their labors as things go forward. So that was.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. O'Connor? Seeing none, Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met June 24th. Mr. Hampton, Mr. O'Connor, Ms. Wiles, and myself. Sarah Reed, Steve Harden, and Steve Ball discussed the economic development agreement for Hyde Park. Amy Smith discussed tax abatement compliance confirmation and also tax abatement non-compliance waivers with a couple companies, and she will discuss some of that this evening. Chief Matt Mitchell of Noblesville Fire Department discussed additional appropriation for fire department acting in capacity and holiday pay. Andrew Rowald discussed an appropriation transfer of the downtown street lights. And Mr. Light, Deputy Mayor Matt Light, discussed the American Rescue Plan Act spending plan. That and the claims come to this council with a favorable recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Davis? None? Can I have a motion on the claims?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion to approve the claims in second. This is a roll call vote.
Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, the claims are approved.
Thank you. Previously discussed ordinances. Council to consider ordinance 440621, an ordinance of the city of Noblesville, Indiana, authorizing the issuance of its taxable economic development lease rental bonds, Series 2021, Federal Hill, and approving and authorizing other action in respect thereto. Mr. Sullivan.
How you guys doing? My name is Connor Sullivan. I'm here on behalf of Mike Howard today. Just a few things Mike wanted me to kind of just mention before you guys move on with this. This ordinance, as you guys all know, it authorizes the issuance of the leased rental bonds for Federal Hill parking structure in the amount of $10 million. These bonds will be paid for from a property tax levy that's not to exceed $700,000 a year, and the term is for 25 years. From discussions with the underwriter and the financial advisor, they believe the interest rates will be anywhere between 2 to 3%, probably closer to 2%. And that it had a favorable recommendation from your finance committee. And that also the last thing is that right now we are on schedule for closing of this bond and developer-backed bond late July, early August. So, any other questions or anything I can answer this time?
Questions for Mr. Sullivan? Seeing none, can I have a, yes?
President, I would move that we approve ordinance 44-06-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 440621 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Council to consider ordinance 450621, an ordinance approving additional appropriations in the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund. Sam Barris.
Thank you, council members. Sam Barris, Office of Finance and Accounting. This is the second reading of an additional appropriation of $446,400 for the street department. Talked about this one last time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just as a reminder, there's actually no fiscal impact associated with this additional appropriation. There's no more, it's for road salt. There's no more road salt being purchased as a result of it. It is just to get our road salt purchasing on the correct budgeting payment cycle timeline. But if anyone wants me to elaborate and go through it again, I'm happy to do that.
Any questions for Mr. Barris?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would move.
Wait a minute. I need to open up the public hearing for ordinance 450621.
Mr. President, seeing no one come forward for the public hearing, I would move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
There's a motion to close the public hearing for ordinance 450621 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed.
Now you can.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I move that we approve ordinance 45-06-21 as presented.
Second.
Motion to approve ordinance 450621 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
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 Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. New ordinances for discussion. Council to consider ordinance 460621, an ordinance creating a policy regarding virtual participation in meetings.
Motion to introduce.
Second.
Lindsay Bennett.
Thank you, Council. Lindsay Bennett, City Attorney. In response to COVID-19 and the necessity of having some virtual meetings in 2020, the General Assembly passed some legislation this year that would allow electronic participation in meetings that was not previously allowed prior to the governor's executive order. The new legislation allows all participating members of the governing body to participate in a meeting electronically if they can simultaneously communicate with each other and allow the public to attend and observe the meeting simultaneously electronically. Probably going to say electronically a lot in the next 5 minutes. So in order to hold these electronic meetings, they have required that the governing body pass a policy to put some rules in place as to when a member can participate, how many members can participate electronically, notice, things like that. So that's what this ordinance does. It allows participation by any member of council electronically in any meeting. There are limitations during the year of how many meetings a member can participate electronically. It also allows the entire meeting to be held electronically with 3 business days notice to the clerk. And as you likely know, roll call votes are required if one member is participating electronically. And the ordinance also allows committee meetings to be held electronically or allows members to participate electronically. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? What is the timing of this? Do you need to request something else from us here to waive this on the?
Yes, I would respectfully request that you pass on first reading tonight.
Questions? Mr. Boyce?
Pass 46-06-21 on first reading.
Second.
There's a motion to waive the rules and pass ordinance 460621 on the first reading, and a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Aye.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye. Thank you.
Mr. President, I would move that we approve ordinance 46-06-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 460621 and a second. This is a roll call vote.
Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, 0 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Council.
Thank you.
Council to consider ordinance 470621, an ordinance approving additional appropriations in the general fund and establishing a public hearing.
Move Deuce.
Second.
Mr. Barris, sorry.
Thank you, council members. Sam Barris, Office of Finance and Accounting. As mentioned, this is an additional appropriation of $220,000 to add to the fire department's personal services budget to cover a couple different types of pay categories that firefighters are and have been eligible for some time. This is another one of those issues that you've seen presented before you, certainly over the last few years, where something should have been included in the current year 2021 budget and was left out. In this case, the 2 types of pay at hand here are holiday pay, which if firefighters who work a shift on one of 16 different public safety approved holidays, they're eligible for a slight bump in their pay for that shift, and then for acting in capacity pay. So the fire department has to have a certain number of people of various ranks on each shift, and if they don't, they have to temporarily elevate somebody to fill that higher rank, and they're eligible for a small temporary pay bump for that shift. Now, in the past, budgets have not been so tight and so specific, and also the fire department has typically started their recruiting classes later in the year, which has created vacancy savings and kind of more or less covered up things that were excluded from the budget, like these categories. This year, because that recruiting class started earlier, which is actually a good thing, budget was tighter, and this was brought to our attention. So this would add $220,000 to their budget both this year, and then would fix the issue on an ongoing basis going forward. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we also have Chief Mitchell here if you have any questions for him.
Any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Connor?
I would move that we establish a public hearing for ordinance 470621 at our next scheduled meeting.
There's a motion to Oh, waiting a second, I'm sorry.
Second.
There's a motion to establish a public hearing for ordinance 470621 at the next meeting in a second. It's a roll call vote.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, the public hearing is established.
Miscellaneous number one, council to consider resolution RC 3221, a resolution concerning tax abatement compliance. Amy Smith.
Good evening, how are you all tonight? Amy Smith, Economic Development. So annually, businesses have a requirement to submit compliance for their personal or real property tax abatement that has been approved for them. This is an annual process that Economic Development oversees and reviews the forms to ensure that our business partners are meeting their benchmarks or their that were originally approved with the abatement. Just a few things to highlight. For real property tax abatement, there are 24 active abatements that have generated 1,958 jobs. There's one abatement that ended in 20P21 and 2 are ending this year, 21P22, and 5 will end next year. 3 have not started yet, and this information is provided in a separate document that was emailed to you. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer that. For personal property, there are 12 active abatements. 4 ended in 20P21, 2 are ending this year, and 4 will end next year. A few of the abatement recipients did not get their forms in on time, as mentioned earlier tonight, and those will be presented to you under separate resolutions to set a public hearing and discuss possible waiver of noncompliance. This item was presented to Finance Committee and received a favorable recommendation, and so I ask for your approval of these abatements, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, can I have a motion?
Mr. President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-32-21 as presented.
Second. There's a motion to approve RC 3221 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, the resolution is adopted.
Council to consider resolution RC 3321, a declaratory resolution approving a waiver of noncompliance and establishing a public hearing for Performance Marketing Group, Inc. Amy Smith.
Good evening again. Performance Marketing Group is located at 13058 Sperling Court. They are in the final year of an approved 10-year abatement. They have requested a waiver of noncompliance to reinstate the abatement for this year 21P22. They are a full-service event marketing and promotions company who moved their corporate headquarters to Noblesville. Council approved the abatement in April of 2010. It was a 69,000 square foot building with an estimated investment of $3.1 million. PMG did submit the required compliance. Tom Weber, their controller, is here this evening if you have any questions of him.
Any questions for Ms. Smith or PMG?
Mr. President,
Yeah.
I would move that we
Well, let's-
establish.
wait, we need to approve it first and then,
No.
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 Do the hearing
Well,
first.
it doesn't matter.
It-
Either way.
Okay.
Either way is fine.
Might as well establish a public hearing for
Okay.
RC-33-21.
Second.
there's a motion to establish a public hearing for RC 3321 at the next meeting in a second. This is a roll call vote. Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Aye, the ordinance, or the public hearing is established.
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-33-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve resolution RC 3321 in a second. This is surprisingly a roll call vote.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Air.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
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 Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
8 aye, the resolution is approved.
Council to consider Resolution RC 3421, a declaratory resolution approving a waiver of noncompliance and establishing a public hearing. ProGuard Products. Amy Smith.
So ProGuard Products is located at 9650 East 148th Street. They relocated to Noblesville from Indianapolis. They expanded a building, added additional 15,000 square feet within a capital investment of approximately $900,000. Council approved a 10-year real property abatement in December of 2014. This is year 5 of 10 for ProGuard. They manufacture aftermarket automotive products for police vehicles. We did work with them and did receive their completed compliance form. Kim Bays, General Manager, is with us this evening if you have any questions, and this was presented to Finance and did receive a favorable recommendation.
Any questions for Amy Smith or the ProGuard?
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-34-21 as presented.
Second.
Motion to approve RC 3421 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
8 ayes, 0 nay, the resolution is approved.
Go ahead, Megan.
Mr. President, I would move that we establish a public hearing for Resolution RC-34-21 at our next.
Second.
Motion to establish a public hearing for RC 3421 at the next meeting in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye. Council to consider Resolution RC 3521, a declaratory, I control that word every time, resolution approving a waiver of noncompliance and establishing a public hearing. TMRZ Holdings. Oh, it's Amy Smith.
RZ Automation is located at 9690 East 150th Street and are in the final year of a 7-year abatement. They specialize in automation for robotics and industrial companies. Originally located on Harriman Boulevard, they outgrew their space and constructed a 15,000 square foot facility with an estimated capital investment of $1.7 million. Council approved that abatement in October of 2013. RZ Automation has completed their form and returned it to Economic Development and are requesting a reinstatement to the abatement for this year. Unfortunately, Tony Hillers, their president, is traveling on business and not able to make it tonight. This item did go before Finance Committee and received a favorable recommendation.
Any questions?
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-35-21 as presented.
Second.
Motion to approve RC 3521 in a second. Is a roll call vote.
Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air? Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
8 aye, the resolution is approved.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
President,
Yes.
I would move that we establish a public hearing for RC-35-21 at our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Second.
The motion to establish a public hearing for RC 3521 at the next meeting in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce? Aye. Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
Public hearing is established.
Thank you very much.
Council to consider Resolution RC 3621, a resolution approving an economic development agreement with MAB Capital Investments LLC, Hyde Park. Sarah Reed.
Good evening. This item before you tonight is a project agreement for up to $142 million worth of investment for Hyde Park. The Hyde Park project is a culmination of a collaborative effort between MAB Capital Investments, LLC, and the City of Noblesville. MAB has proposed to redevelop 274 acres plus or minus into a master plan development that will include a variety of businesses, shops, restaurants, and residential options, along with recreational uses and a walking and biking trail near Hamilton Town Center. With the Hyde Park project, the developer will be creating and dedicating a 162-acre park with open space and trails over 2 miles, and will also install the missing segment of road and bridge infrastructure along 141st Street from Maryland Road to Bowden Road. Since the executive session on June 4th, the Berkeley Investment Project on the southwest corner of Bowden Road and Campus Parkway has been added as the first project identified within Hyde Park. Just want to recap a couple of points from the executive session for you. The bonds issued for Hyde Park will be developer-backed and not to exceed 85% of the overall TIF. The Berkeley Investment Project specifically will utilize 95% of the TIF generated, and I'll let Mr. Harden explain that in more detail here shortly. And that will be a privately owned structured parking, the reason for that increase specifically. And that will maximize the site development due to constraints in size, kicking that off. A lot of that area is in the floodplain, as we discussed. Each individual project itself will come before you for both bonds and zoning requests, which gives us a checks and balances on the proposed development, the quality, the uses, and the architecture. And I am going to step back and let Mr. Harden and Mr. Ball, who are both here this evening, go over the project vision quickly, the layout, and the details specifically for the Berkeley Investments piece. I'm going to display that for you, Mr. Harden, provided technology works when I sit this way.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the City Council. For the record, my name is Steve Harden. I'm a partner in the law firm of Fagery Drinker. I'm pleased to be here this evening representing MAB Capital. And from MAB Capital is Mr. Steve Ball. Many of you have met before. He's also has his other company, Bedrock Builders, Noblesville based, which will be the development manager for this project. Also with us here this evening is Mike Stone with Berkeley Investment Group. There's Mike. He's also a Noblesville resident. And Tony Berkla, who is the head principal at Berkeley Investments, is also a Noblesville resident. So a lot of Noblesville connections and Noblesville people bringing this transformative project to the community tonight. First off, we want to thank Mayor Jensen and his leadership and his team from the Economic Development Group, particularly Sarah Reed and Andrew Murray and Dennis Otten for their work. I think Sarah would probably share with us the many months that we've worked on this project with a vision from starting with a fresh slate. We had the land and we had a vision, but we asked the city literally at numerous meetings, let's dream big. What would the city like to see out here? What can we do to be really, truly collaborative? And that's resulted in what we have before you tonight. So Sarah asked me just to kind of go through the different areas. If you look at the top right, where you see in red, that's Campus Parkway. I don't have a way to point to anything, but Sarah can do that. Oh, thank you. This is how it works at home, too. I just stand up here. So in red, where her cursor is, on the north side of Campus Parkway and on the south side, those are the two spots that Berkeley Investment Group has a vision to collaborate with Steve Ball and MAB Capital and the City of Noblesville to bring a couple of amazing mixed-use development projects there. The first one that will be coming back in front of you is on the south side. That's the 2-acre site that's right there, and there's an image in your materials that Sarah could point to also that shows it'll be a 4 to 5 story building, structured parking, and then first floor restaurant and retail right there on a prime location at the heart of the corporate campus, within walking distance both to the north and to the south. We don't have the final designs for the north side, but that will be a similar quality and character as what the Berkeley Investment Group has done before, if you're familiar with some of their work. So we're very thrilled to be partnering with them on those two key, very visible parts of the project, and it will help set the stage for the rest of the partners that we bring to the table. As we rotate south, going down Bowden and Brook School Road, right there in the purple, that is a multifamily development site. We have some strong interest in that. We would anticipate that would be one of the early projects also coming back to you. And then staying on that side of Brook School Road in the darker blue, that's likely to be, again, some other type of residential development. It could be townhomes, stacked flats, some type of multifamily attached as well there. On the other side of Brook School Road, in the red color, that is planned for offices to be 1 to 2 story offices for local businesses who are growing here in the community. The city would like to help to provide a platform for them to be, so we would anticipate those to be smaller office spaces. And then behind that in the tan color is anticipated to be townhomes as well. And then that blue, that's one of the Dream Big spots. We're showing that as an entrepreneurial incubator right now, and we've shared that with the city, said, let's dream big. If there's something that you have, somebody comes to the city, has a bright idea, the one thing that's certain, it's like concrete driveways are going to crack. It's certain that there'll be another idea as we work through this with the city that will come about. Most of the development partners that we're working with right now currently, we would ask Sarah Reed to be our co-developer with us. So most of these have come from the city. The city has vetted out different developers and projects that they've done and has either proactively reached out to them to see if they'd like to come to the city, or they've reached out to the city and the city has directed them to this project. So we look forward to continuing that. But that blue area, there's nothing set specifically from MAB's vision, but we've worked with the city to say, let's find something that really is neat, that the city has a dream for, and let's see if we can't make that work during the process. As we continue on down to the south, right there at 136th and Brook School, that's about a 4-acre site for neighborhood serving retail and restaurants. And then additional, a mixture of type of residential could come in there and that tan next to it. As we move over to Maryland and 136, that blue area is anticipated to be local office. And then finally up at the north, to the north there in the yellow is anticipated, that's about 28 acres for some type of a senior residential use as well. The 2,800 feet of road improvements that Sarah mentioned has been a key part of the process, is right there along 141st Street. That will be connected there. And then in the middle of the whole concept plan is the 160 acres or so of parkland that will then be developed as part of the project. They'll have over 2 miles of trails, parking for the public, connecting to all the other trails that will be out in the area. And so we're very excited and very thankful for the city's support and the collaboration, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Mr. O'Connor?
Thank you for that presentation.
Yes, sir.
Very much appreciated. In the Hyde Park building that's proposed, what's the mix of the square footage? So commercial, I guess I'm looking for square footage, like commercial, rental, and there may be some for sale in there?
So on the, if you're, I think you're referring to the Berkla Investment Group's project,
In
the
the-
2-acre site.
Yes.
It's probably about 15,000 square feet of first floor restaurant retail with another 3 to 4 floors of multifamily. It's the mix hasn't been finalized, but I'm gonna, Mike, can you remind me how many units? There's approximately 50 units, 50 residential units on the 3 to 4 floors above that.
For sale on the
It's
upper
possible,
level?
it's potential, so we're sorting through that. We think those are gonna be terrific units at the top with a great view, so we're still sorting through that.
You know, I appreciate that this is almost 8 to 10% of our entire corporate campus, and I think the way that you put this development agreement in front of us, have established the total infrastructure costs and allowed us to bite it off in pieces, set the vision and in tone that's a real high quality. I appreciate the way this is put together and the partnership here. And we're getting a lot of benefits, the 141st Street pushing through a new park. And future councils or this council hold your feet to the fire on the architectural style, but I really appreciate the way this was put together on a very large project. Any other comments or questions?
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-36-21 as presented.
Second.
The motion to approve RC 3621 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
8 aye, the resolution is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council to consider Resolution RC 3721, a confirmatory resolution designating property as an economic development revitalization area and authorizing a tax abatement for effing properties. Amy Smith.
Good evening again. So Applied Intelligence Corporation is moving their corporate headquarters to Noblesville and will build a 12,000 square foot office production facility with an estimated capital investment of $1.3 million. The building will be located at the northwest corner of Pleasant Street and Union Chapel. This was presented at your last meeting. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And Mr. Effing is with us again this evening if you have any questions of him.
Any questions for Amy Smith or Mr. Effing? I will open up the public hearing.
President, seeing no one come forward for the public hearing, I would move that we close.
Second.
There is a motion to close the public hearing for RC 3721 in a second. Is a roll call vote.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Abstain.
7 aye, 1 abstention. Public hearing.
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-37-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve RC 3721 in a second. Is a roll call vote.
Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton? Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Abstain.
7 aye, 0 nay, 1 abstention. The resolution is approved.
Thank you. Council to consider Resolution RC 3821, a confirmatory resolution designating property as an economic revitalization area and authorizing a tax abatement for Patch WBP Lot 1 LLC. Amy Smith.
So this resolution is for economic revitalization area for the entirety of Washington Business Park and a 5-year tax abatement for Patch WB Lot 1, which is 162,000 square foot building, which 24,000 square foot of that has been leased by Morel Group. This was before you at your last meeting as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions? I will open up the public hearing.
Mr. President, seeing
Yes.
no one come forward from the public, I would move we close the public hearing for Resolution RC 3821.
Second.
There's a motion to close the public hearing for RC 3821 in a second. Is a roll call vote.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
Aye, 0 nay, the public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
President, I would move that we approve Resolution RC-38-21 as presented.
Second.
Motion to approve RC 3821 in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
Aye, the resolution is approved.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your hard work tonight, Amy. Council to consider transfer TA 0721, an appropriation transfer in the Downtown Development Fund to provide funding for streetlights. Sam Barris.
Thank you, council members. Sam Barris, Office of Finance and Accounting. As mentioned, this would transfer $100,000 of appropriation authority within the Downtown Development Fund from contingency to Street Department Improvement and Rehabilitation to purchase streetlights. There's $325,000 left in contingency of the Downtown Development Fund appropriation. This would use 100 of it, so happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Sam Barris?
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Connor?
I move we approve transfer TA-07-21 as submitted.
Second.
There's a motion to approve transfer TA 0721 and a second. Is a roll call vote. Last one.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Air?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye. Hoping Ms. Wiles will get to vote 3 times first tonight. It's gonna
It's a
be
record.
Council comments. I wanted to congratulate Councilor Smith on the birth of his baby Parker. They are not home yet, but everything seems to be going well. And also, if we could keep former Mayor Mary Sue Rowland in our thoughts and prayers as she lost her husband this week, and just keep her in our thoughts and prayers. Any other comments from the council?
Mr. President,
Yeah.
just want to thank Mr. Yost, Ms. Lees, and both council members for the extra roll call votes tonight to allow me to participate. I do appreciate that. I've only got 2 more left in the month of July, and I want to break my streaks, please, and Mr. Yost make it happen, and thank you guys for letting me do that.
Yeah. I'm not real comfortable with you hovering over behind me all night, but I think it's.
You're like acting like this, is that patting you on the
Yeah,
head?
exactly. Did I do good? Did I do good? That's good. This image of Jesus or something.
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz, there you go. Council,
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
yeah, shut him off. Can you do that, James? Oh, there you go. Comments on that note, I'm gonna
Move to adjourn.
move to adjourn. Meeting's adjourned.